Some men don't need enemies to bring them down. They manage to destroy themselves slowly, almost invisibly, one careless sentence at a time. Not with fists, not with obvious recklessness, but with words that sound tough, confident, even wise, at first glance. Yet, beneath the surface, those phrases are nothing more than fear disguised as laziness. You've heard them before, haven't you? Those tired lines that reveal a man has stopped growing, stopped questioning, and started drifting through life. The Stoics once warned, speech is the mirror of the mind. And it's true. When your words are rooted in excuses and ego, your life inevitably begins to follow the same pattern. In this video, we won't sugarcoat the truth. We're exposing 6 things foolish men often say, phrases that silently erode discipline, dignity, and respect before you even notice what's happening. But here's the crucial part. We'll also uncover what a Stoic man says instead. Because your language is never just noise, it's a signal. It either sharpens your soul like a blade, or sells pieces of it off until nothing remains. If you've ever spoken a line and instantly felt the weakness hidden inside it, prepare yourself. This lesson might sting, but in the best possible way. So, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts below. Personally, I'd rather stay silent than sound like a fool. So let's break that silence now, for your words end up causing more damage than any enemy could. The first phrase, "That's just how I am." On the surface, it sounds firm, immovable, like a declaration of strength. But in reality, it's one of the most dangerous sentences a man can utter. Why? Because it's not surrender to truth or to principle, it's surrender to stagnation. Too many men confuse stubbornness with strength. They mistake standing still for having integrity. They plant their feet in the same spot year after year, convincing themselves that immobility is noble. But it isn't. It's ego, dressed up in the cheap mask of pride. I once knew a man named Carl, a retired Navy officer, always well-dressed, 70 years old, the kind of man who could command a room without raising his voice. From the outside, he seemed solid, steady, but those closest to him knew the truth. He was stuck, frozen. Every time his wife asked for more closeness, more vulnerability, Carl would brush her off with, "I'm not built like that." When his son tried to bring up old wounds, Carl dismissed it with, "That's not how I do things." And so, little by little, his relationships withered. Not in flames, not with loud arguments, but with dust collecting in silence. Nothing changed, nothing moved, and eventually nothing remained. When his wife finally left, she didn't slam the door. She simply stopped waiting for a man who refused to evolve. That's the real poison of this phrase. It sounds like conviction, but it's really a prison sentence, a trap built out of false strength. Stoic philosophy rejects this kind of surrender. Seneca reminded us, as long as you live, keep learning how to live. That wisdom hits harder the older you get, because life never stops shaping you, unless you stop listening. Too many men, especially in later years, confuse experience with wisdom. But experience alone means nothing if it doesn't lead to growth. A man who repeats the same excuse over and over becomes little more than a statue of himself, hard, unmoving, and eventually forgotten. A Stoic man doesn't hide behind a fixed identity. He refines it. He listens not out of weakness, but because he knows each day offers him another chance to sharpen who he is. Discipline doesn't mean staying the same. It means choosing progress over pride. The man who clings to "that's just how I am" isn't standing firm. He's already decaying. Once that rot sets in, it spreads. His words shrank. His mind closes. His life narrows into routines and resistance, until one day, all that's left is a worn-out phrase and a long list of people who stopped waiting for him to change. A true Stoic doesn't treat identity like armor. He sharpens himself on truth, like steel against a whetstone. He adjusts. He evolves not because the world pressures him to, but because his own soul demands it. And if the first phrase didn't sting, the second one will. Because now we're talking about the man who confuses silence with strength, and hides behind that lie to avoid everything real. The phrase is simple. Real men don't talk about feelings. At first it might sound like toughness, but science tells us otherwise. Research from the American Psychological Association has shown that men who suppress their emotions carry a far heavier cost, higher risks of depression, heart disease, and even premature death. Yet still, this damaging belief continues to echo through generations, passed down like a family heirloom and worn like a badge of honor. But at its core, this phrase isn't about honor, it's about fear. A man who clings to it isn't proving strength. He's avoiding the inner war he doesn't dare fight. He pulls the blinds shut, hoping the storm will pass. But storms don't vanish just because you ignore them. They brew, they swell, and eventually they break. And when a man buries his feelings, what actually happens? He buries himself alive. The danger is subtle but devastating. Pain, confusion, resentment when left unspoken. They fester beneath the surface until they erupt as anger, addiction, or a cold disconnection from the people who matter most. And here is where Stoicism is often misunderstood. Too many people think control your emotions means deny your emotions. But that is not Stoicism. That's avoidance. The Stoics never taught suppression. They taught clarity. Marcus Aurelius, one of history's most powerful emperors, filled his private journals with his deepest fears, griefs, and flaws. He didn't deny them. He didn't broadcast them. He faced them. He dissected them with ruthless honesty, so they couldn't rule him in silence. That is what a Stoic man understands. He does not fear emotions. He fears being enslaved by emotions he refuses to acknowledge. Emotional maturity doesn't mean breaking down in front of strangers, nor does it mean numbing yourself into some false image of Stoic cosplay. It means quietly observing what stirs inside you, with clarity and honesty, and choosing to respond from stillness rather than impulse. The irony is cruel men who refuse to speak about what they carry are often the ones carrying the heaviest loads. They think hiding every crack will keep them safe. But in truth, the cracks are what let the light of wisdom shine through. To speak about your struggles calmly, openly, without shame isn't weakness. It's a rare strength. Because here's the truth. The man who never voices his inner life is often the man most controlled by it. And if you cannot face your truth, someone else, your partner, your family, your children will be forced to live in the shadow of your silence. It's not my fault. Few lines reveal inner weakness faster than this one. At first, it sounds like a defense, a man trying to protect himself. But beneath the surface, it's an admission of defeat. This is the language of someone who has surrendered agency, who has decided life simply happens to him. He sees himself always as the victim, never the cause, never the solution. And that mindset doesn't just chip away at dignity. It sterilizes an entire existence, leaving nothing but bitterness in its wake. The Stoics warned us about this kind of thinking. They saw it as the beginning of moral decay. Epictetus wrote, "It is not events that disturb us, but our opinions about them." What does that mean? That circumstances are rarely the true enemy. It's our interpretation that gives them power. And no interpretation is more destructive than believing responsibility always belongs to someone else. The man who constantly blames the economy, his boss, his wife, his past, his enemies, or even fate itself, isn't explaining his pain. He's handing away his power. Worse, he grows deaf to the one voice that could change everything. His own Marcus Aurelius put it plainly: you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. A man who refuses that truth isn't stoic. He is shackled by excuses. Blame is easy, it's a reflex, a shield for those too afraid to reflect. Responsibility, however, is hard. It demands structure. It requires that you stop waiting for apologies. Stop hoping conditions will change. And instead, ask yourself one brutal, liberating question: what can I control? And the answer is always the same: your reaction, your direction, your discipline. Older men often carry deep scars, financial, emotional, spiritual. And yes, many of those wounds were not their fault. But carrying that pain forward, as if it's a free pass to stagnate, that isn't wisdom. It's cowardice with a long memory. The Stoic doesn't deny injustice, but he refuses to live chained to it. Seneca wrote, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials. Life will scrape, grind, and rub you raw. But blaming the friction doesn't make you stronger. Enduring it with grace and adapting does. So the next time disaster strikes, and that old phrase rises in your throat, stop it before it escapes. Replace it. Don't say, 'It's not my fault.' Say, 'It's now my responsibility.' That subtle shift, that moment of ownership, is what separates a man who grows bitter from a man who grows better. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, "Do not waste time wondering what a good man should be. Be one." That single line slices clean through entitlement. It doesn't ask what you've been denied. It asks, what are you doing right now to live with virtue? The man who constantly says, "I deserve better," is usually doing less than he believes, while expecting more than he's earned. He trades humility for hunger, craftsmanship for complaint. But the Stoic, he doesn't walk through life with a list of debts the world supposedly owes him. He walks with discipline, with quiet resilience, with the willingness to do what's hard without begging for applause. Epictetus put it bluntly: first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. That is the opposite of entitlement. It's the embodiment of responsibility. Yet entitled men often confuse dissatisfaction with growth. But they are not the same. Dissatisfaction without discipline only breeds bitterness. True growth requires discomfort, responsibility, and restraint. Notice this. Never once does a Stoic man say, "I want what's mine." Instead, he declares, "I will become what I admire, regardless of what I receive." That is a radical shift in focus away from outcome toward process. For many men in later stages of life, this phrase creeps in quietly when careers plateau, when recognition fades, or when relationships falter. The temptation is to blame others for not seeing your worth. But here's the hard truth. If you spend more time announcing your value than developing it, you've already lost the thread. Seneca cautioned us, it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. And among the greatest wastes is the time spent demanding rewards for work never done. A man of depth, of substance, of Stoic character doesn't ask, "Do I deserve better?" He asks instead, "Am I still sharpening?" Because that question ties him to the process, not the prize. And when a man falls too deeply into entitlement, the next stage is even worse: retreat. Not the kind that regroups or strengthens, but the kind that avoids. That's where the next phrase enters. That's not my job. You'll hear it from men who've quietly stepped away from leading, yet still want to be seen as dependable. On the surface, it sounds like healthy boundaries. But in truth, it's avoidance dressed up as maturity. These men slowly shrink their presence until all that remains is obligation and routine. They confuse minimal effort with balance, and in the process, they trade usefulness for comfort, reducing their value to nothing more than a checklist. Never an ounce beyond it. I once knew a man named Ree, an old machinist from Pittsburgh. For 30 years, he worked the factory line, never missing a shift, arriving every day at 5 a.m. sharp. At work, he looked like the model of reliability. But at home, his motto was "Not my job." The dishes, not his job. Helping his teenage son navigate big decisions, not his job. Talking through emotional struggles with his wife, definitely not his job. He provided, he worked, he paid the bills. He did the bare minimum everywhere that demanded more, and he called it being dependable. But when his wife finally left after 28 years, Ree sat in the same kitchen chair he always had, shaking his head and saying, "I did everything I was supposed to do, and that was the problem." He never asked, "What needs to be done?" He only asked, "What was assigned to me?" After seeing how entitlement erodes a man's character, we now step into an equally dangerous trap: the quiet retreat from responsibility. And that, make no mistake, is not leadership. It's silent withdrawal. The Stoics never reduced life to duty alone, they lived with purpose. Marcus Aurelius once asked, "What is your vocation?" To be a good man. Not a man hiding behind job descriptions, but one who notices a gap and chooses to fill it. True Stoic strength shows itself when you keep showing up, even when it's uncomfortable, even when nobody sees, even when no one is keeping score. Because here's the truth. The man who only does his job is secretly hoping someone else will shoulder the weight of what he avoids. Each time a man repeats, "It's not my job," what he's really saying is, "I refuse to be inconvenienced by responsibility." He thinks he's protecting himself, but in reality, he's surrendering his influence. The Stoic man knows that power isn't built on avoidance. It's forged in the willingness to embrace what needs doing, if when no one asked. That, and once you begin outsourcing your effort, your value quickly follows it out the door. You're no longer the person others lean on. You become the person they work around. That's the slow erosion of presence. From here, we move to an even more dangerous phrase. This one doesn't simply shrink your actions. It numbs your very spirit. It sounds harmless, even calm, almost like wisdom whispered through clenched teeth. But in truth, it rots ambition from the inside out. Let's talk about the man who surrenders to apathy with a shrug and 5 deadly words. It is what it is. So the next time those words rise in your chest, pause. Ask yourself honestly, is this true Stoic acceptance, or am I simply too tired to care? Because every time you choose passivity, you make yourself easier to ignore. And one morning you may wake up not respected, not feared, not even loved, just unnoticed. And for any man once capable of more, that is the cruelest fate. Let's close with clarity. Now that you know these 6 phrases, slowly eat away at your strength. Only one question remains. What will you say instead? Every man leaves a trail, sometimes in the footsteps he takes, sometimes in the words he speaks. The truth is, people rarely judge you by your grand plans, or even by your past. They judge you by what slips out of your mouth when you're not performing. And these 6 phrases, they don't just sound weak. They are weakness, distilled into words. Repeat them long enough, and they become your very identity. But here's the twist. Identity is never final. Not if you have the courage to confront it. Weakness itself is not the true enemy. Denial is. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If you speak like a victim, you will suffer like one. But if you learn to speak with clarity even in private, even when no one is listening, you begin to rebuild something far greater than reputation. You rebuild character. A Stoic man doesn't speak to impress. He speaks with precision, with restraint, with deep awareness. And when he falls silent, that silence carries its own weight. If this message struck a nerve, let it, because that's where growth begins. Like this video, subscribe to Mind of Stoic, and share your thoughts in the comments. Asterisk, I choose strength over sound. Because while foolish men fill the air with noise, the wise speak and the world leans in.